Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Happy Wednesday, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and today we're going to be talking about two very important issues that are actually state issues. Yes, I'm talking about marriage and education. So we've already seen with the overturning of Roe versus Wade that the Supreme Court has rightly said that abortion and the legislation around banning abortion is a state-level question and issue. There are so many things that the federal government has taken and encroached upon that the 9th and 10th Amendment actually squarely provide to the states on the state level. So if you look at Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, it provides only limited specific power to the federal Congress on what subject matter it can legislate on. But of course, the Democrat-led majority in Congress just wants to completely ignore that when they're talking about codifying Roe versus Wade and the so-called right to abortion. They want to take it away from the states. The Department of Education has long sought to tie federal dollars to the states, and the Secretary of Public Education of Oklahoma is going to join me in a few minutes to talk about why that is such a disaster and why it's absolutely true that public schools are going woke and they need to stop tying themselves to federal dollars. But also last night, the bipartisan Congress, 47 Republicans, actually joined on to a bill that seeks to codify in statute same-sex quote-unquote marriage. Of course, we have to put that in quotation marks, and the leftists don't like that. But we know that marriage is defined by God himself as between one man and one woman. 31 states prior to Obergefell versus Hodges, which was the Supreme Court opinion in 2015 that legalized same-sex marriage on a federal level, which was totally unconstitutional. Prior to that decision, 31 states had constitutional amendments saying that the states would recognize marriage as between one man and one woman, and that's it. So now that the Dobbs case has shown very clearly that the conservative majority of the Supreme Court is actually willing to look at the parameters and the limited powers on the federal level of the U.S. Constitution and return properly some of these very critical and highly contentious issues to the states, now Congress is trying to codify on a federal level the so-called right to same-sex marriage. And so what I tweeted yesterday was this: respect for the 157 Republicans who stood firm for marriage and the Constitution. They voted against this bill. But here's the interesting part. I hope that if this bill passes in the Senate, it simply provides a clear pathway for the Supreme Court to overturn Obergefell by properly recognizing that it is a state issue. 31 states have amendments. So, of course, I'm getting a ton of pushback and all of these things from the left, just going, what do you have against gay marriage? Well, obviously, I'm a Christian. And so I believe that the Bible clearly says that marriage is between one man and one woman. And we, as human beings, have no power or authority to redefine the reality that is marriage. And of course, the church rightly has the province of actually having a marriage solemnitized or having those marriage ceremonies, and the state cannot compel the church to solemnize any marriages that are outside the parameters of what the church understands as the truth of the Bible. That should be very clear. But also, when we come to the state level, when the state does have jurisdiction over marriage, insofar as you get a marriage license, those kinds of things, you never get a federal marriage license. It's always from a state. It is a state issue. When you look at the US Constitution, domestic relations as an entire category is not left to the federal government. It is a state issue. It's the same thing in education. It's the same thing in abortion. It's the same in so many other issues that the left and an overreaching federal government has tried to say we want to force the entire nation to bend to our will instead of rightly and properly leaving this to the jurisdiction of the state legislatures to best represent the voters of their state, as Dobbs said, the people and their elected representatives. So no matter what you think about same-sex quote-unquote marriage, it is a state level issue and it rightly belongs to the states. And so what the Democrats have done, and 47 Republicans who signed on to this ridiculously unconstitutional legislation, they are trying now through federal statute to take that power away from the states so that they can seek to compel their will on all 50 states instead of rightly leaving it to the state legislatures. So this may, and I hope it does, backfire on the Democrats and the 47 Republicans in the House if it passes the Senate. The easy way that it could potentially backfire is then for this legislation, if it goes through the Senate, signed by the president, then it could be challenged in court, and it would provide a very simple, clear pathway for the Supreme Court to then look at the issue of same-sex marriage on the federal level, invalidate that statute as unconstitutional, and rightly overturn Obergefell versus Hodges and say that this issue is rightly in the province of the states, just like abortion. So people have said, well, why didn't the Dobbs case reach that issue? And why did Justice Alito very clearly say in his majority opinion that this case, the Dobbs case, only deals with abortion and should not be read into to deal with any other issues? Of course, Justice Thomas, in his concurrence, actually went further than that and said that he would overturn Obergefell versus Hodges, Lawrence versus Texas, some of those cases that were wrongly decided in their inception. He went further and said he would do that. But Alito, writing for the majority, simply said, and all he said was that the only issue before the court during the Dobbs case was the question of abortion, period. He did not comment further on any other issues. That doesn't mean that the majority of the Supreme Court won't overturn Obergefell. It just means that abortion was the sole issue before the court in the Dobbs opinion. If you go back and you actually read the dissent in the Obergefell case from Chief Justice Roberts, he disagreed with that 2015 majority that said that same-sex marriage is now legal in all 50 states, and basically overturned, which the Supreme Court has no authority to do, the constitutional amendments of 31 states recognizing traditional marriage as between one man and one woman. He said that no matter what you believe about same-sex marriage, this is not for the Supreme Court of the United States to decide for the states. It's up to the state legislatures. So I hope that this legislation completely backfires on the Democrats and those weak, ridiculous, progressive 47 Republicans that voted with the Democrats, because these issues rightly belong to the states. And 31 states, like I said, have constitutional amendments to their state constitutions that rightly recognize the true, correct definition of marriage as between one man and one woman. So these are really interesting times that we're living in. I am really looking forward to the next term of the Supreme Court. And hopefully, if the Democrats decide to proceed with this legislation and it actually gets enough votes in the Senate to be passed, and then of course the president will sign it because he's an idiot and he's of course a progressive, then this could provide a very clear pathway to the Supreme Court with the intention of overturning Obergefell and rightly returning marriage to the states. So we'll be right back with Ryan Walters, who is the Secretary of Public Education for the great state of Oklahoma, and we're going to be talking about how federalizing education and what's going on in our classrooms absolutely needs to be a state issue. We need to reject federalizing public education and the truth of what is going on in our classrooms. We'll be right back. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. Well, if you believe the mainstream media, then you think that conservatives are just exaggerating that there is so much wokeness going on and critical race theory in the classrooms. And according to the leftists, conservatives can't even define that, much less look at what is actually being taught in the classrooms. We've seen in Virginia and other states how parents are actually being put on terrorist watch lists just for the content of their children's education and asking questions of the school board. But what is the truth about this? So there's a great piece in the American Greatness that says woke goes to the classroom. If our kids are taught to hate this country, we will no longer be a country that God has so richly blessed. This is by Ryan Walters, who is the Secretary of Public Education for the great state of Oklahoma, and he joins me now. So Ryan, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jenna. I really appreciate this.
Yes, your article in the American Greatness highlighted that a superintendent of one of the lowest performing districts in Tulsa public school systems wanted to push back on an audit for Tulsa, saying that this was bigoted. I mean, how crazy is that?
Yeah, I'll give you some context here. And again, it's so indicative of the far left and their vision for education. It is literally dangerous for kids as we look at putting boys and girls in the same bathrooms. And then it is academically dangerous for kids because it absolutely teaches them all the wrong lessons, frankly. And what we see in Tulsa Public Schools, they have a superintendent there named Deborah Gist, and she comes in and they have been a low performing school, one of the lowest in the state. To give you one statistic, 89% of Tulsa public school students are not proficient in a single subject in a single grade level in that district, right?
Wow.
So we passed a bill last year to ban critical race theory in our classes. The bill states that you cannot teach one race as inferior or superior to another, and you can't inject racism into directly at kids, saying that a kid, labeling a kid or a race, right? So what we've then seen is we found that they were sending teachers to a professional development that was required, And in the professional development, they were telling teachers that in every lesson they teach, they need to teach kids social justice. They need to teach kids about environmental racism. They need to teach kids about societal racism in the STEM fields. We're talking all grade levels. We're talking every lesson. And then we go, okay, well, there's a reason why 89% of your kids aren't proficient, because you're more focused on creating social justice warriors instead of actually the basics. 3 school board members reach out to the governor's office and ask us to audit the full district. One of the school board members who asked for this audit says, "Look, we need to focus more on the basics instead of indoctrination." In a Facebook post, and the superintendent calls her a bigot. By the way, this is an African American lady. She's calling a bigot, and then lashes out about an audit to ensure that their money is being spent appropriately. So but it's just such an example of what the woke culture values. They value creating social justice warriors more so than they do reading, writing for our kids, and it's dangerous for our young people.
Absolutely. And this is just another example highlighting how people who are in charge of the education of our kids in public schools are more concerned about this type of content than they are the actual proficiency in reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so, as the leftists are kind of pushing back and saying, well, this is fine as long as it's in addition to the rest of the education programs. Can you kind of dispel that myth? Because it sounds like if there's not proficiency in basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, I mean, how can math actually be taught from a critical race theory perspective instead of just basic math?
That's right. I mean, when you start talking about, one of the examples we saw out of a textbook manufacturer or publisher there was literally in a textbook saying, listen, if you're white, you're exponentially more likely to be a racist, and putting that in early grade school level classes. And again, what they're trying to do is set up a scenario where you are injecting with students that if you're white, you are racist inherently. You have to overcome for that. You have to atone for that. There has to be, and then you have to be discriminated against in order to achieve this type of, social justice. And then again, you tell minority students, instead of the message of you can be all that you want to be through hard work ethic, through knowledge, through proper moral values. You can have a life that's very fulfilling. You can have a career that's fulfilling. Well, instead of telling them that, you tell them, hey, listen, your neighbors are racist. The kid next to you is racist. And, we're hoping to kind of get them out of that by kind of browbeating them over it. This is a recipe for disaster. My background is I'm a public school teacher, is my background. I'm a history teacher. And I'm gonna tell you, the worst thing you can do to students is set low expectations on them. And when you inject that ideology that injects race and racial tinged ideas of inferiority or superiority in these early grade levels, what you're going to do is you're going to create a culture of low expectations for those kids, and we are not going to see successful students. And frankly, we're going to see students that hate their country. And where are we going to be in 20 years if these kids grow up and don't believe America is a country worth fighting for?
Yeah, it'll be exactly like the progressive leftists want it to be, with tearing down our institutions, tearing down the American dream, and everything that this country was built upon. And so, with this audit, is that moving forward? And what do you hope, or what does the governor's office hope that that will reveal?
Right. And I mean, in this audit, so they were the school district that stayed closed longer than any school in the state. They stayed closed for over 340 days. And then they got the most federal money to stay open. So they got all the money to stay open, but they stayed closed the longest. We're going to see where all that money went. We also have indications of contracts that money was misspent. And then thirdly, we see what were they using state dollars to promote critical race theory ideology in their classrooms? Well, we're going to get answers to all these questions. The audit is very early on, but again, it's interesting to see the reaction from a superintendent that, again, with transparency, and this is, again, you nailed this earlier. You see the left that is hell bent on pushing parents out of their kids' education process. They do that by they fight transparency. I mean, it's amazing to me. Transparency is always going to be beneficial when we talk about public, schools, when we talk about anything, really. The parents need to be able to see what's going on in the schools. An audit provides us that opportunity. But again, we see the superintendent lash out. So we're going to get to the bottom of all that. And again, in our state, we're not going to allow Oklahoma to go woke. It's not going to happen. We have conservative Christian values. We want our students to grow up and understand that America is the greatest country in the history of the world. We want them to understand that it's the guiding principles that this country was founded on. It wasn't by accident. It was because of our founders' Christian faith and because they were students of history that they put together this tremendous roadmap that created this amazing, amazing country. And hey, we want to teach everything. Our students need to know the times that we fell short as well. But that's the only way that we continue this incredible experiment of America is if our kids know our history, if our kids understand that. And the far left is trying to inject into our schools a hatred for America that we've got to stand up for, or we will lose this next generation.
Absolutely. And you're so right that the left is scared of transparency and they don't want audits in anything from the curriculum that is being taught in public schools to election integrity issues to everything in between. They want to do this in the cover of darkness and exclude everyone so that they don't have to answer for the programming and indoctrination of children and the way that they are behaving in the classroom and the way that they're behaving and ignoring other laws around election integrity, and tons of other issues. And so audits are always a good thing. I mean, in any sort of profession, that's what keeps people on the same sort of goals and the same path, and to say, okay, is this being spent according to state law? Is this being spent even according to the way board of a private business would operate? And so it would seem like audits should be a routine sort of function that everyone can agree. Yeah, we want to make sure that we all have the same goals, but it seems like the left it has these goals that they aren't precisely articulating, because when they say social justice, they want to elevate that as if it's meritorious rather than properly define it. And so when you look at the type of public school education and the curriculum that should be taught in classrooms, do you see Oklahoma going the way of, say, for example, the state of Florida, that will have legislation that will say, okay, these types of things for K through 12, like critical race theory, we are going to say cannot be taught in public schools? And is that going to be potentially a recommendation to the legislature?
Yes. So the governor and I, we pushed for this and got a critical race theory ban through the legislature last year. But what we're
Great.
looking to do, and again, to your point, we've got to make sure civics is taught. We've got to make sure our history is taught. So we are looking into a deep dive of how do we continue to emphasize good civics classes, a robust history of the country, and ensure that all of our kids understand that. Because the other thing, too, to your point, our history is what shapes us as a country. There's so much value in it as for the future of what our country can look like, but also it is inspiring to young people. When taught correctly, they will find heroes in our history that will inspire them to lead up to their full potential. Our kids need that. And the leftists are going to continue down this path. And I mean, and that's another one of our concerns is the sexualization of young people. So we're absolutely looking to make sure that they're not pushing these type of overly sexual classes or curriculum into the earliest grade levels, and we've seen issues with that as well. So it is very important to us that we are going to continue to push on providing more transparency for parents so that they can see what's going on in their schools, they can see the lessons. And the other thing that we're big champions of is we believe nobody knows best for their kids and their parents. We want to advance school choice. We want to make sure that mom and dad, not only can you see what's going on in your school, if you want to take your child to another public school or to a Christian school, we want you to be able to do that, because at the end of the day, that is how you empower parents, is to say, you're going to see everything, you're going to know everything that's going on in your schools. And then, hey, if there's a problem and it doesn't get corrected, put your student in a better environment so that they can be successful.
Absolutely. And, Ryan, I wish that more of secretaries of education in states would have this same view and would fight as hard for the proper curriculum and the proper education and instruction for children, and to teach a love of country. I mean, that isn't exclusive to Democrats or Republicans or policy issues or things that we can reasonably, rationally debate. It's to say that we all come together under a common goal and a common philosophy and a common purpose. That's what makes us Americans. And we already have so much diversity that we don't need all of what the left is promoting for social justice and to tear each other down based on the color of our skin or our demographic or some other kind of rule. And so, are there other states that you are working with, or how does that work on the state level, to try to get CRT out of our public education system, more countrywide, because this is a state by state issue?
Great question. Yes, I've worked with Florida. I love the things that Florida is doing with their Secretary of Education. There's a great commissioner out of Tennessee, again, that they've done a great job of providing a transparency tool so that every lesson is available for parents to look at. Texas has done something similar. I've worked with their commissioner as well. And this is what, again, you made a point really, really profound there, I think, in that states, okay, we've got to, first of all, we shouldn't have a federal Department of Education, just to be frank. Shouldn't happen. We don't need it. All they do is cause problems. All they do is try to inject things into our schools. The reason we have that 10th Amendment and that one of the powers reserved to the states is the education systems. Your states control what's taught in your schools. Your states control who can teach in your schools. Your states control accreditation of all that. This is state run. So the reality is, what states should be doing is ensuring none of this indoctrination is in our schools. We're going to continue to do this and work with other states to do that. Maximize transparency. And then ensure that parents are as much in charge of their kids' education as possible. You do that through transparency, but your parents have to have school choice. We've got to get good folks on these local school boards as well. That's one of the best movements we've seen over the last few years, is getting good candidates fired up, running, getting on school boards, asking great questions about how to empower kids. That's how we continue to get this on the right path. And thankfully, if we can continue to push back on the feds, which we're going to do in Oklahoma, getting the federal government out of the state of Oklahoma and in education, then it becomes a wholly answered question by the states. And our red conservative states, especially like Oklahoma, we can do this. We can have a vibrant school system that maximizes the potential of every individual learner. But we've got to get out of that. We've got to reject the far left view of education. We've got to get the feds out, and we've got to come together as communities and get that back.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. And I'm with Betsy DeVos, who said just this week that she called for the abolishment of the Department of Education on the federal level. And that is constitutionally appropriate. And so, 99% of federal agencies are actually unconstitutional because they go over and above and exceed the limited power that is given to the federal government and to the federal legislature. And so the executive can't administrate anything, but they have this type of encroachment that has gone over and above and into state issues. And so I'm really glad that you reinforced that. So for the parents that are watching and the concerned citizens who say, yes, this is awesome, I'm right there with you, I love the state of Oklahoma for doing this, how can parents in states help to get the feds out, help to have that type of transparency in public education? What can the individual citizen do?
Great question. So one of the things we're also doing, I talked about the audit of Tulsa Public Schools. The governor and I have called for a full audit of our entire education department, where we're going to look at every single dollar, whether it's local, state, or federal. And one of the things we're looking at is we want to see all the strings attached to every federal dollar we've ever taken. And we're going to make this a very transparent and very open to the public type document and presentation, because we want to have this conversation with Oklahomans. Look what we're getting with our federal dollars, and look at the strings attached, and look at, I'll give you an example. All the time they require in a grant, about critical race theory and social emotional learning and all this kind of stuff they attach that's got indoctrination in it. But I'm going to tell you, the other thing they do is they require you to staff up. They require you to hire this temporary staff that's just there to implement a program, instead of allowing them. So then the state is taking on this burden of, well, we just hired X amount of employees. Well, now that federal dollars are out. So do you fire all of those employees? Do you find another position for them? And again, what do you know? A lot of bureaucrats, they find a way to just, well, now we're going to do this, or now we're going to do that. So it puts these bootstrap states by putting all of this on them. So we're going to have that conversation. I would say, parents, I would get involved with your local school district by demanding transparency. Show up at school board meetings. Make sure you've got school board members that are answering to you, the parent, because again, nobody knows best for their kids and their mom and their dad. Period. That is indisputable. And so that locally, statewide, have your states do a deep dive of, what are we actually getting for this federal money? Is it worth taking any of this federal money? And start unwedding yourself from that money, and then have that conversation. What do we're looking at this here. What do our teachers need to know to be a teacher? What does that certification process need to look like? What kind of standards do we have? What kind of professional development do we have around those standards, so that we know that our teachers are teaching good history? What kind of, what kind of materials are available there for our kids? How, and then again, the ultimate answer is, do you have, as a parent, are you empowered to ultimately choose the school and choose the education path for your child? That school choice is so important in this conversation. And to me, those are the ways that we take the power from the feds, and frankly, even the power that state governments have, and put it back to the dinner table, where it's mom, dad, and their young kids talking about, hey, what did you learn in school today? Have you thought about this career? Have you thought about that? Let's talk about those type of things. That is the core of what education should be. You've got a parent with a child discussing what they're learning in their classes. That's how we get this back on track.
Yeah, well, so well said. And Ryan Walters, you are one of my new heroes now for everything that you're doing in the state of Oklahoma. Please come back anytime, keep us updated, and really, really appreciate the work that you're doing there on the state level. And I hope that you rid Oklahoma of all of the feds. That would be a really great win. So thanks so much for joining. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you very much, Jenna. I really appreciate it.
My Pillow is having their biggest sheet sale of the year. You all have helped build My Pillow into the amazing company that it is today. Now, Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO, wants to give back exclusively to you, his listeners. The Percale bed sheet set is available in a variety of colors and sizes, and they are all on sale. So, for example, the queen size is regularly priced at $89.98, but is now only $39.98 with our listener promo code Jenna, Jenna. So order now because when they're gone, they're gone. The Percale bed sheets are breathable and have a cool and crisp feel. These come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so don't miss out on this incredible offer. There's a limited supply, so be sure to order now. You can call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna, or go to mypillow.com/Jenna. You can click on the radio listeners square and use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. Thank you so much to all of Mike Lindell's listeners and listeners of this podcast for making sure to support My Pillow and using our exclusive listener promo code Jenna. That's Jenna.